Welcome, everyone. Here we are at Technology and Democracy in Necessary Alliance, an event promoted by Formiche Magazine in partnership with the Center for American Studies and the European Commission representation in Italy. I introduce our speakers. Vincenzo Amendola, Italian Minister for European Affairs. Thank you for your presence today. Robert Cardillo, former director of the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. Welcome, Honorable, and thank you for having accepted our invitation. Antonio Parenti, the European Commission representative to Italy. Welcome. Jean-Pierre Darnis, professor at the University of Paris and head of the Technology and International Relations program at Italy's International Affairs Institute. Hi, Jean-Pierre. Welcome also to.
Good evening.
Robert L. Strayer, Executive Vice President and Policy and Information Technology Industry Council and former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Cyber and International Communication Policy of the U.S. Department of State. Thank you for your presence today. For your information, the event is held in English, but for the non-English speaker, we provide a translation in Italian. If you prefer to switch in the Italian language, you can click the button below your screen. I would like to explain you how the event will take place. First of all, we will have the opening remarks of Robert Cardillo, then the speeches of Antonio Parenti, Jean-Pierre Darnis, Robert L. Strayer, and Vincenzo Amendola. Well, while our guests gave their speeches, who wants to make a question can reserve himself for the Q&A session on the Zoom chat. And the Q&A session will start after the speeches. Now I will briefly introduce the main topic of the event. The incoming decades will be marked by the technological competition. 5G, cloud quantum computing, and artificial intelligence are just some of the areas in which a strategic confrontation between players such as China and the United States is taking place. For Europe, the issue has two forms, taking a third way, developing its own autonomy, or follow the path of new and stronger alliances. For the United States, too, the challenge seems less simple than expected: to continue the confrontation with China or to resume the thread of closer cooperation with the European allies. Formiche Magazine believes that Italy can play a pivotal role in strengthening the transatlantic relationship, starting with the challenge of the emerging technologies. Europe is launching the Digital Markets Act and the Digital Services Act. As Meredith Broadbent of the Center of Strategic and International Studies pointed out in our last issue, the draconian approach of these new European regulations risks to damage the Union's ability to achieve its goals of technological sovereignty. Moreover, as Martin Russell of the Center for a New American Security explained, we need to find a common code of technology among like-minded countries. This entails coming together and creating new collective tech standards, from artificial intelligence to competition for fostering and technological growth based on liberal democratic principles. This is why we have decided to dedicate the December issue of the magazine to this topic and to promote today's discussion called Technology and Democracy: a Necessary Alliance. That's all for my introduction. Now I'm very glad to give the floor to Robert Cardillo for his opening remarks. Please, Honorable.
Grazie, buonasera. It is a great pleasure to be with you all and to help open up the conversation that we will have. I will make a few remarks to perhaps facilitate the discussion that we will have after we all speak. We are all fast approaching a time in which technology will enable a continuous sensing of all of the world's activities, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. Such holistic collection will facilitate a detailed model of the planet and everything that is happening on it. One can imagine many benefits of such a model. Precision agriculture resulting in increased yields, real-time detection of nefarious actors such as drugs or wildlife poachers, polluters, illegal fishing, natural disaster preparedness and response, and enhanced measurements of the planet's environment. One can also imagine potential downsides of such a model. State intrusion into the private lives of its citizens, refugee interdiction, abuse of state power employed against minorities or dissidents. Such a world will demand a rethinking of privacy itself. It'll require us to find the optimum balance between the benefits of the technology, their effects on our privacy, the potential for misuse, and the implications for national security. As we continue to embrace innovation and technological advances, the demand for transparency escalates exponentially. And I attribute that this will be contributory to our success as a liberal democracy in this technological age. Here are a couple key questions that I think we need to wrestle with. How do we balance the advantage of shared awareness with the potential for misuse as our world moves into an era of what I call radical transparency? Or put another way, how might our societies adapt, innovate, and evolve to harness the power of geospatial data and technology while we mitigate some of the negative effects and the ethical challenges that I described? As we seek to address these questions, I would suggest that we all take a heavy dose of humility. These are uncharted waters. Precipitous actions could have deleterious effects. I'm not saying that we should go slow. Rather, I'm saying we should be deliberate, we should be connected, we should be thoughtful, and we should be ready to modify as we understand the impact of our initial decisions. I think all of this feeds into the conversation that we're having today and this evening. Now, as I said, nearly anything that could or would be measured about the physical activities of life on Earth will be sensed and delivered. From that sensing, it will be processed into analytics. Because it will happen in near real time, it will become in the loop and we'll have a measure, analyze, adjust feedback loops to optimize many of the physical industries and activities on Earth. Like many others, I've used the analogy of the rising tide of data that has the potential to overwhelm us and bring us more data, but less information and less shared awareness. To continue this metaphor, the tide that is cresting in a way that puts us now on the curling edge of the wave. Computer vision, machine learning, artificial intelligence offers the chance for us to propel us forward into this world of radical transparency. As sprawling webs of sensors, cameras, and satellites give some a near real-time view of everywhere, certain parallels to recent history are unmistakable and a bit unnerving. Data gathering startups are popping up all over, and they are locked in cutthroat races to monetize what they tout as intelligence. Tech giants are indexing the Earth by hoovering up satellite images the moment they are released to public access and then pouring the data into vast archives. Though today these companies often grant free access to selected researchers and nonprofits and academics, their long-term business strategy hinges on converting these data into dollars. And those who are being observed and recorded are not customers, they turn out to be the products. If we anticipate many of the ways that these new windows on the world might be misused, it should be possible to set up rules and agencies that will encourage the best uses while thwarting bad actors. For example, when data is too massive for nonprofits and individuals to download, is generated by the government, stored on private servers, and digested by profit-making companies, who controls it? Who can access it? For what reason? With what oversight? And what role, if any, would the derived data play in a legal framework? I would remind that I believe our transparent society is here to stay, no matter how hard one tries to eliminate their digital presence. There is no way to put this technological genie back into the bottle. And if you think of transparency as light, as I do, it shines both ways. I believe transparency is good for liberal democratic societies. As Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis once observed, sunlight is said to be the best of disinfectants. I agree with Justice Brandeis. I agree that transparency favors justice and that evil lurks in the dark. Properly thought through, an era of radical transparency can lead to a better planet and a more humane world. I further believe that the bedrock of civil discourse is trust, not so that we agree on every issue, rather so we appreciate the other perspective and empathize with differing views. Properly thought through, an era of radical transparency can lead to a more humane world. However, achieving such a world means striking a balance between access and control, between openness and privacy, and ultimately between good and evil. And I'd further argue that the expanse and growth of such surveillance is inevitable. It will indeed continue. And I'd suggest, though, if we choose wisely, that this inevitability will be a good thing for our societies, a very good thing. I think this transparency will lead to shared awareness, shared context, shared perspective, and shared experience. And when I say shared, I don't mean identical. Shared perspective can also mean different points of view, which should lead to social or civil social discourse. I'll finish where I began. As a species, we're on the cusp of an awareness of our planet and everything that is happening on it in real time, and it leads to many potential outcomes. How will such awareness affect our social compact? Which company or technology will successfully translate that awareness into improved decision-making? I look forward to continuing this discussion and learning from each of you. Thanks for inviting me to be part of this important, and I would argue essential, conversation. Mille grazie.
Thank you for your inputs and your questions. I like your question about balancing the power of the technology with ethical challenges. Thank you, Robert Cardillo. Stay with us. Now I give the floor to Antonio Parenti. This initiative was possible also thanks to the Italian representation of the European Commission. Antonio Parenti, could you please explain to us the meaning of the two measures of the European Commission? I'm talking about the Digital Markets Plan Act and the Digital Services Act. In your opinion, is it wrong or correct to imagine these two initiatives as an act of independent European sovereignty in an anti-American key, as claimed by many international media? Then is this kind of Europe anti-American? There is a lot of attention and worries on this point. Please.
Thank you, Mr. Jacob. Thanks for inviting me to this event today. And let me first acknowledge the presence of the Minister of Centramento, the Honorable Roberto Cardillo, and all the other speakers. It's a pleasure to share such a platform with all of you. The two tools you just mentioned that were the two proposals, which were in fact put forward to the European institutions yesterday by the Commission, are basically two faces of the same problem. There is a Digital Service Act which wants to regulate basically what companies put on internet, with the idea that what is illegal offline is also illegal online, and what is allowed offline is also allowed online. And the need, therefore, to make sure that when approaching European customers and European companies, there is there is indeed a certainty that these rules are respected. So the first one is mostly basically about the content of what is placed on the internet and online. The second one, the Digital Market Act, is looking towards what the companies do in the market and how they behave in terms of market segmentation. It's more of a competition, if you want, type of tool. It concerns all companies, but it also includes and look more specifically to those companies whose importance, whose reach within the European Union is such that in fact they play a role that's called of gatekeepers. So it's when they, for example, are able to achieve at least 10% of the European population. And ask to these companies, which are tremendously successful, to be particularly careful in the way they behave in the market. Now, both pieces of legislation come along with a certain amount of powers in the European Commission, at least in the draft, which can go all the way to a 10% of turnover fine for companies who do not respect the Service Act, or even to dismissal of part of the companies if the Digital Market Act is not respected. So it's clear that the two pieces of legislation that the European Union is putting forward have important sticks to, if you want to call it that way, embedded in the pieces of legislation. Are these a sign of sovereignty? Yes, of course they are. Like every piece of legislation, it's a piece of very long discussion which come about after a summer of very long and deep discussion with the civil society in Europe, with all the actors included, and is a piece of legislation that will have to go through our institutional system. It is an anti-American act. Definitely not. Definitely not. I don't think so. I mean, and even I didn't think it before, and I don't even think it now when I listen to the Honorable Cardillo speaking about a lot of the concerns that are present in the United States, which are very much the same at the heart of the European Union. The question is not to punish companies, both being those American, being those Europeans, or being those Chinese. The idea is making sure that they do not abuse their power. And I think this is very much understood by mainstream, even mainstream media. I mean, yesterday there was an article on the Financial Times. I think if I can quote a journal, a newspaper, which is not necessarily always the most friendly towards Brussels, as it's called, which was recalling that indeed such an overhaul of European legislation in terms of digital market was long overdue. Of course, like every piece of legislation, the Financial Times was pointing out towards possible abuses. But we have a very strong judicial system, which sometimes also goes against what the European Commission wishes and consider appropriate, like some recent cases can demonstrate. So I think that our system has the belt and braces. But besides that, and I think is also extremely important, we should not take those pieces of legislation, especially when it comes to our relationship with the United States, which I think was at the core of your question and your very pertinent one. Those are not two isolated ideas. They're part of or they must be seen also together with the strategy that the European Commission has just proposed to the member state on a new relationship with the United States. And in that piece of paper, there is a very clear, very strong interest in working on the technological side with the United States. It's very clear to the European Commission that with the United States, we not only share a lot of values of history, but I think we also share or we can share a great deal of the future. This is when it comes to technology. This is when it comes to other issues, to technological product, but also to technological services and content of the internet. So the proposal of the Commission is to look more closely, to have a very close relationship, a joint tech agenda with the United States to tackle what are differences and to look at challenges that may come up in the future. I think this will be very important. It would be a strategic decision that the European Union and the United States must make in the near future, not to regulate a market, but certainly to make sure that our systems, which are profoundly democratic systems, can thrive in an area and in an arena where instruments like internet can be positive for spreading democracy, but it can also be an instrument for poisoning democracy. I say we have seen certain risks of this, both in the United States and in Europe in these recent years. So I think we have a very fundamental common agenda and values to protect and work on in the coming years. And I'm sure that we can rely on the Biden administration, with all the specific interests that Biden administration may take into account, for a shared agenda, which is going to be a positive agenda and not a difficult and complicated period ahead of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador, for your opinion. Now the turn of Jean-Pierre Darnis. The European Cloud Gaia X and measures that Antonio Parenti talked about forecast the possibility of European digital path through the use of measures and public funds. Is this really the case, or should we work towards a different ecosystem built with the American allies? And then we are very sensitive to the issue of security, Jean-Pierre. Considering that today we have security challenges that concern both the United States and Europe, why not considering the issue in terms of international security? Please.
Well, thank you, Flavia. Thank you to Formiki for the invitation, and my warm thanks also to the authority presented and to the assistants. I'm very happy to speak after Ambassador Parenti, because I do think that since a few days we can speak in a different way about these issues, because the Digital Act that has been proposed a few days ago by the European Commission is a very relevant, I think, political step, and it can trigger some reflections. There is for sure a leadership in terms of political leaderships coming from the European Commission, meaning also European Union, in terms of digital regulation, if we remind also GDPR. And we can also see something very interesting, I would say a mixed approach, which can be also, let's say, described through the personality of Commissioners Thierry Breton on one side and Margrethe Vestager on the other side, which is an approach between industrial policy, if you want, on one side, and competition policy on the other, which are the two, let's say, legs of this digital act, and might be the two sides of some, let's say, priorities for member states, but which are building up a compromise vision at the EU level. My guess is that the problem of competition in the digital realm are a growing concern both in the US and in the EU, and we can probably share some views with our American friends about that. And it's logical that the Commission acts in that regard. And we can expect also that the US administration will also take actions. The question, thinking to the market, is about a convergence or not in terms of regulation of the competition between the EU and the US. Because first, we can see that the Digital Act competition side, the market side, is quite classic for me, it's inspired by a classic, let's say, antitrust policy, which we can think when we were thinking about the US in the 1950s, in the 1960s. So I think it's a quite, let's say, philosophically friendly approach for US antitrust, this European one. And then there is a concern that, you know, if we will be able to converge in terms of antitrust policies between EU authorities and US authorities, well, it would be very good for, let's say, a global market or the market on both sides of the Atlantic. Secondly, the Commission is trying to tackle the issue of the rule of law within the digital realm. And when Robert Cardillo was speaking about transparency and democracy, we are very close to that topic. It's a key issue for democracy. And this obviously could foster further convergences with the US. Joe Biden has declared to propose a renewed alliance of democracies. Well, I think that this alliance democracy should maybe think, I wouldn't say out of the box, but think digital and rule of law in the digital realm, which are by definition cross-border, trans-border, is a very huge and important topic that can renew our relations. On the industrial policy side, there is a will coming from the EU to invest more in the digital sector. It's a good news because Europe has, for example, relevant research and development. And then obviously there is a balance to be found between a push for an autarchical vision and a very open system. Technological sovereignty has been an issue in Europe growing since a few years. It was traditionally a French position for obvious historical reasons, but it has been joined in a more interesting way by Germany, which now express concern also in terms of this policy. And Germany is the one who has pushed for a European cloud initiative, the Gaia-X, which has been quoted by Flavia before. So the German position is quite interesting because it represents a balance between commercial and industrial interests, which are strongly connected with the US one, but also a remarkable sensibility in terms of democracy and rule of law. Gaia-X, which is starting its development now, and maybe our friend from Atos could give us his view about this, because Atos is very much involved in this effort, can be an opportunity to conceal the democratic and security EU concern, the will to push for a EU industrial policy with new EU actors able to grow on the cloud service market, and the very much needed involvement of US industrial actors, which are today in a nearly monopolistic position on the cloud market worldwide, and are called to participate in a collaborative framework. A few remarks on the global security side, because you asked me, Flavia, to think about this. I think it's extremely important to bear in mind that the transatlantic alliance, which is organized through NATO in the defense sector, shall be renewed on this civilian technological side. There is a risk, I think, that US industrial capabilities are so monopolistic that they impede to maintain or develop relevant EU capabilities. This is a problem for democracy in terms of data, of access to data, but could be a problem also in a strategic way for a global security alliance. What kind of alliance can it be if EU cannot master some parts of its own technology? And more wisely, would it be clever not to be able to count on different systems and solutions, and also to be able to develop redundancies and resilience at a more global level towards, if we think towards, for example, non-US and non-EU powers, which could turn aggressive. This scenario is quite complex between the power gained by US-based platform companies, the US government, and the EU one. For sure, after Robert Cardillo and Antonio Parenti intervention, we already can see that there are some extremely interesting convergences, I would say, to exploit at the government level. So federal US authorities and eventually EU ones can really draft a roadmap. But there is this third, I would say, this third guest at the table, which are, in a way, in plural way, the US-based platform companies, which are somehow so huge that also the US federal governments, in a way, raise the issue to manage the relations, the contracts, and the legal framework. So my guess also is that we have to include, and it's quite new, and it needs to be maybe to some new forms. We have to include also this side of the triangle to be able to define, instead, to raise up, barriers and to defend our capabilities, but to find some convergences and to if we do agree on a common definition of democracy, which I think we can, well then, let's renew these things through a more intense and sounded technological alliance. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your interesting point of view on NATO's role, for example. Thank you very much, Jean-Pierre Dernis. Now is the moment of Robert L. Strayer. Robert, Antonio Parenti and Jean-Pierre Dernis spoke about the All Continents Digital Project. What do you think about European plans? And what do you suggest to Europe? In your opinion, if today there is not a good alliance between the US and Europe, what has it gone wrong and how can it be remedied? So also on the US side to improve the relationship, please.
Thank you. Thanks for that excellent question. It's a privilege to be with such a distinguished group of excellent panelists, and I want to say hello to everyone out there in the virtual world and participating in things like we do today, which we could never have done even a decade ago. I'm the Executive Vice President of Policy at Information Technology Industry Council, which is a trade association for 70 of the most successful technology companies that produce hardware, software, components for 5G, and all kinds of other online services. To look at what is common in both the United States and in Europe is, I think, where we should fundamentally start from. And that is, I think that people and governments on both sides of the Atlantic want to see a safe and secure ecosystem for all the products and services that we want to use online and to buy online. We want to see markets that are competitive and innovative. I mean, the history of digital technology over the last several decades, from the beginning of the internet to the late 90s when we were starting to see web pages and being used more and more for e-commerce and many other services, has been one of innovation. We have applied limited regulation, allowed companies to invest billions of dollars in research and development, turn that research and development into things that businesses and consumers want, and then allow those companies to succeed. And when they gain revenues and profits, they put that money back into R&D for the next cycle of innovation. And when they do innovate and succeed in the market, they grow to scale, they compete globally. That model has worked, it's tried and true, and will work in the future. Regulation will not facilitate an increased amount of R&D and innovation that we all need to succeed for companies to continue to succeed in Europe and in the United States. A partnership of companies and greater cooperation is a way that we can see enhanced sovereignty for both people in the United States and in Europe. Increased tech sovereignty can come from those partnerships that are based on companies that have the shared values of the people on both sides of the Atlantic. We've seen tremendous innovation come from companies that have shared values. In Europe and the United States, there's a great deal of respect for the rule of law, for the rules-based international order. And the cornerstone of that really is that, in the markets at least, is that there be open competition, that there not be protectionism that seek to exclude companies just because of their country of origin, that there be a fair playing field. So when it comes to the Digital Services Act and the Digital Markets Act, there's a great deal of concern about the way that it defines companies that are targeted for enhanced regulations or targeted for additional restrictions on behavior in the Digital Markets Act. They seek to go after very large platform companies that basically, by the definitions that we've seen so far, don't exist in Europe or only exist in countries outside of Europe, in particular the United States. The type of protectionism that shouldn't be part of a policy. Now, where there can be, I think, a lot of agreement would be that back to the core principles of safe and secure online platforms, that is helping establish legal clarity around illegal content, around the obligations of platforms, that is done on a agnostic as to size basis, as well as on the digital market side of targeting behavior and not looking at the size of companies. The longstanding best interest of the consumer, that is consumer welfare standard, has what has been guiding antitrust and monopoly regulations for a long period of time and has proven to be a successful way to deal with those issues. So where else can the United States and Europe work together? I think there's a dramatic opportunity that sits before both the EU and the United States looking to 2021. This is built on a history of already working together, establish norms for the uses of emerging technologies. We've seen the OECD be a place where in 2019, a number of countries in Europe, as well as the United States, agreed on principles for the use of AI, that it should be human-centric, that need to be transparent, and they need to be explainable. Those are core principles related to human rights and the best use of technology. And there's now been stood up a global partnership on AI and an AI policy observatory at the OECD. So there's a lot of work going on there. There have also been proposals coming from the EU, which I think are probably welcomed here in the Biden administration, not to speak for them, but to work on an EU, United States Trade and Technology Council, a council that could work on a number of issues that are important to both sides, again, based on shared values around the uses of technology. Could you look at issues like 5G and 5G use cases and consider how the supply chain can be enhanced, what kind of joint R&D can be done together, looking at artificial intelligence, of course, as well as high performance computing. There's also an incredible need to look at the tax regimes around the world right now. There's been proposals in Europe for digital services tax that are, again, somewhat protectionist in that they target a very small number of companies for those taxes. There's a need to rethink the digital taxation regime for the digital age. And OECD is a place where hopefully a large number of governments could come to agreement on that tax regime in the OECD next year. So there's a lot of opportunities for joint work together. In the United States, there's a number of tech funds, including through the National Science Foundation. In Europe, there's the Horizon Europe Fund. There's also going to be at least 20% of the economic recovery fund from the pandemic dedicated to digital technology. There's important ways that those can help set us up for joint success between US companies and European companies in the years ahead. And I also think we should jointly look at the foundational components of that are prerequisites for the digital success. One is having the right kind of workforce, the right skilled workforce, investing in STEM education and in universities. And then there's also the need to focus on funding additional infrastructure, broadband infrastructure. It's an issue in the United States. It's also an issue in Europe. The pandemic has taught us that we are so reliant on that broadband infrastructure, but it's also very important for students and workers who want to fully participate in the digital economy. Last thing I would say is that the area of working together between the United States and Europe is important to help develop the technology. But in the end, the standards for technology, technical standards over decades have been done on a global basis. It's important that those remain truly global. that we allow not political influence to impact the ability of the selections of which standards and which technologies succeed. We need to let the market help select that, or the market to dictate that through what's being offered up by many companies and choosing the best technology at the time. Otherwise, selecting a particular technology will hold back innovation. If it's the wrong horse to bet on, then others will quickly develop something else that's better. And so it's not a successful process to try to select a particular technology and then dedicate a large amount of resources into one mechanism in a particular technology area. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert and Prayer. So no autarky and yes to collaboration between US and Europe. Now is the moment of our Minister, Vincenzo Amendola. Minister, you listened to the different opinions to the European digital future and the relationship between the EU and the United States. In this digital challenge, what awaits Europe and the West, and what role can Italy and your government play? Please.
First of all, thank you very much, because starting from Honorable Cardillo till Robert Stryer now, I think that we have all of us a common track. So we are more united than the narrative. The current narrative speaks about the difference between European Union process to the second digital revolution and the United States. Because Honorable Cardillo is right. We have, first of all, an ethical challenge, all of us, because the radical transparency that is boosted by the technological revolution is sharing many opportunities, of course, worldwide. There are many actors working on this, but at the same moment is sharing, is giving us the point of answering to some question in terms of responsibility. So our basic value and our basic alliance is coming from an history of answering to challenge and, of course, defending worldwide our idea of democracy. Liberal democracy is not an old instrument that we put on the far away from the focus of our common agenda. So Denis was completely right, in my opinion. We have a common legislative action that we have to provide, both of us. If I read also what happened a few days ago with the Federal Trade Commission with Facebook, it means that the awareness of how we reorganize a landscape of legislation towards the big major player in terms of digital consume and also production and distribution, we need to do some common ground and to find some common ground in terms of legislation. Antonio Parenti mentioned very clear the proposals that are coming from the Commission, from Breton and Vestager, are not a point of opposition to any kind of system worldwide. It's just a way to rebuild a European autonomous strategy and an autonomous legislation answering to what Cardillo said at the beginnings, that we have to find a new legislation to rebuild up our identity at the common time. So first of all, legislative common track is a field of not of controversy, but in terms of working together and coordinating the reflection between European Union and United States. And secondly, we cannot escape from the fact, and Robert Stryer was very right, that the technological development, you cannot stop it just by legislation. This is a way of cooperating, especially in the private fields, that will go on. Gaia X is an example. Gaia X is not a cloud, that is an approach of digital transformation using all the major possibilities that are common, interlinked in a common way. It's not something like a state-owned approach to the business dimension. So if the first track of the legislation, with the same awareness that is between European Union, United States, can interlink our reflection and work, also on the private and technological development, we have many good fields to cooperate together. It's correct, Europe in the next years is going to play something, Antonio, correct me, something like 200 billion in terms of investing on digital transformation, means cloud computing, interoperability of system, database. So it's an amount of resources that Europe has the need to use for itself, because we were a bit delayed. If I look at the two giants that were working on technological development. But this doesn't mean that is a way to cut ourselves from a common development. I mean, in terms of production, in terms of research, in terms of 5G, artificial intelligence, quantum computing, data control and data research, within, of course, the clear landscape of cybersecurity perimeter. So my intervention is to say that there is a lot of narrative that is speaking about a necessary contradiction between the two systems. But at the end of the day, on the political point of view, starting from the reflection of Cardillo on the radical transparency related to the boost of democracy in times of digital revolution, at the end of the day, we arrive at the same field and the same point of reference. And also, this doesn't mean any kind of contradiction between the two private systems, that they have to be more interlinked, they have to work together, and they have to grow together. Because in terms of general worldwide competition, our two systems, they have basic value that they have to be defended. And this is a landscape that we have always in our vision, in our horizon. Europe is touching this meeting, of course, with delay, we have to be honest. Legislation that was presented now by Breton and Vestager, I hope that we are lucky that in a couple of years we can fulfill all the steps. We hope, because European time in terms of slogan and messages is very quick. In terms of going to deep realization of all the legislative process, sometimes we are late. But I'm very confident, because this time, for the first point in our history at the European level, the messages are together with the resources. So we are channeling our strategic autonomy towards the digital transformation, empowering ourselves. But I want to be honest, listening all the intervention from the beginning, from Robert Cardillo till now, and with a special reference to Jean-Pierre Darny that introduced this point, we are more on the same track than the common narrative is speaking about European Union and United States confrontation among between the two model, or between the two major regulation for the major and the biggest operational company in this field. So we have the same challenge, we have the same track, and we have to find a common approach to have a common, let's say, system to cooperate, like it was always based on our common alliance.
Thank you very much, Minister. Thank you. Work together for developing together. Thank you to our guests. So Robert Cardillo, Robert Strayer, Antonio Parenti, and Jean-Pierre. Would you like to add something before we pass to the Q&A session? No. So we go on. Let me say welcome to Fabio Massimo Castaldo, Vice President of the European Parliament. Thank you for your presence. And I give you the floor before the Q&A session, please.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Jacob. It's really a good pleasure for me to be together with you today. And I would like really to thank also Formeke and the Center for American Studies to have organized this extremely interesting event today on such relevant issues. And also a special thank to all the distinguished panelists that has just spoke before me, Mr. Stryer from the US Department, Minister Vincenzo Amendola. Hi, Enzo, good to see you again. Ambassador Antonio Parenti, Professor Jean-Pierre Darny. Let me say that, as was said during those interventions, the global competition for superiority in the digital space will be, in reality, the real strategic fil rouge of the upcoming decades. We are aware of that, and finally, as Enzo was saying previously, finally we have clear commitments that are adequate to the ambition, the level of ambition that they would like to express. We are supporting the concept of strengthening the technological sovereignty in civilian aspect, for instance, also in what concerns the use and storage of data produced in Europe that has an estimated value of around 800 billion per year. And we must also become able to manage through appropriate digital infrastructure all this amount of data. I'm following these issues with a lot of attention in the Subcommittee of Security and Defense of the European Parliament. And I can say that this attention has been extremely high, especially considering PESCO, PADR, ADIDP, all these initiatives that are also waiting for the big instrument now that will be put in place. I mean, of course, the European Defense Fund. The paper that was published, designed in the Digital Marshall Plan, it's extremely important because, of course, it's also pushing us in strengthening the cooperation with the US and in the idea that our action must be complementary. We want, of course, to join the force for what is relating for cloud computing, interoperability of systems. We need to use those approach not for isolate ourselves from the European point of view, but to cooperate better in the framework of our cooperation. We have flagship projects that are already, of course, in an advanced level of development. I'm speaking for space and satellite data with Galileo, EGNOS, Copernicus, but also with Gaia X, we are showing commitment for developing an efficient and reliable infrastructure for managing the data, but that must be taken in a framework of a strong cooperation, especially taking into account of the new challenges coming in the military domain and in the approach of some other players that are hostile to the approach of our transatlantic cooperation. I think that NATO involvement is crucial, especially in the military domain. Let's not forget, of course, the digital technologies transpass this domain, and they are pervading the whole of the country's activities. So we should put all our attention and force in the military technologies, but do not see them as the only horizon in which this framework and this cooperation that must go. Not forgetting, of course, that specific requirements must be present in the military communication and similar system, but it might be of better use also if an institution has competencies in military, political, and economical domains, as we are fostering this ambition at the European Union level, leading this transformation hand in hand with the strong vision and cooperation with the US government. So let me say once more, in light also of this new paper of NATO 2030, with the alliance focused more on the global geostrategic competition, I think that the concrete reinforcement of the European pillar of NATO through the development of autonomous capabilities and the acquisition of genuine technological sovereignty will be a benefit for the whole alliance, not because we want to be, we are seeking autonomy for autonomy, but because we must be able and ready to take our responsibility, especially in the European neighborhood, when is required, meaning that if the prominent ally will be maybe distracted and on other priorities and other theaters of operation, we will be able also to fulfill these duties and this commitment. And of course, if they will be available to be present on the ground together with us, that will be always an added value and an extremely important resources for us. So we do not need a competition. We do not need at all a kind of rivalry. On the contrary, we need a full composition of interest. And because as it was reminded by all of you, we certainly share the same values of democracy, respect of rule of law, the human rights, and the reinforcement of and better cooperation from the European point of view to fill the gap that we still have in this domain. It is a common interest, and it is again a cornerstone for European security also to have, because have a better equipped Europe by tip the scale in favor of the Western Bloc in general in the global competition. So let me say once more that I also share what was said previously, especially by Mr. Cardillo, for what is the importance of the ethical aspect of artificial intelligence. Let's not forget that all these investments we are doing must be compliant. And I was reminding this often in the SEDE committee, in the defense committee of the subcommittee of the European Parliament, because of course our ambition must be always in a legal framework that is coherent with our principles and values. And again, let's continue work hand in hand on those projects that will provide us this vision and this important approach, and again to build up a strong and solid plan for our transatlantic partnership even in this domain.
Thank you very much for your time, for your presence. Like Jean-Pierre Dernis, the importance of NATO's role. So Jean-Pierre Dernis wants to add something, maybe?
Yes, a very quick note to remind something that has been touched base, if I can say so. Taxation is representation. So if you pay taxes somewhere in a member state of the European Union, you can really expect that there is, say, a classic representation issue and dialogue with the government. If you don't pay the taxes in the member state and you pay it in another way, it creates other claims. This is a very normal thing. But at the time when we think about regulation, we should associate that on this very important political concern also about equality with other sectors. I think it's a key political issue in today's framework in Europe.
Now we have time for some questions or interventions from representatives of the institutions of private sector who are remotely connected with us. I will follow the order of reservation on the Zoom chat. Giuseppe Di Franco, Group Executive Vice President and CEO of Atos Italia. Please, I give you the floor.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Flavia. Thank you to all the panelists for this extremely interesting discussion between the link of democracy and technology. So bringing the citizen at the center of digitalization. This is what I understood from this discussion. And bringing the citizen at the center of this revolution means really take the security as a key item of the data economy. Because once we have digitalized most of the processes regarding the citizen, the way we treat the data becomes a central matter of democracy. And this is the root reason for me of also the presence and what we as a technological player, we are doing around data sovereignty inside Gaia-X, being one of the founding members of Gaia-X. So data sovereignty is a way to assure security of the data and therefore of democracy. So as a key element. The second point that probably has been already touched by the panelists is the technological sovereignty. That means that does not mean, let's say, a protective measure, but means something that allow us to invest in an adequate way in research and development to be present in the most important technological trend that we are facing in this moment. Giving some example, HPC, high performance computing, is a fundamental pillar to the digital transformation. Investing in this technology and so being ready also for the next step that is quantum is clearly a fundamental pillar for me to assure the technological sovereignty of Europe and the citizen of Europe. A second important topic for me is a synonym that probably I would like to introduce in the discussion, digital with decarbonized. So when I think to digitalize something, I decarbonize something. So, and for me, this is a fundamental topic to think to the environment, on the future environment that our citizens will have in front of them. So, and here I think Europe can give a very important guidelines in introducing really decarbonization best practice together with digitalization empowerment. The last point is that while we speak very often, and these are absolutely fundamental, but are something that we discuss often about the networks, investment on the networks, I think that another fundamental area of investment is on people. And a company like us, we live daily the issue with people, the possibility to access to qualified workforce to develop what we have discussed this evening concretely in the companies, in these institutions, and without a serious program regarding people evolution in the sense of getting the right skills and know-how in Europe about these new fundamental trends, I think that most of the discussion that we had will remain really intense. But to transform them in reality, we need the people with this type of background and know-how. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Giuseppe Di Franco, for your intervention. Thank you to our guests. I don't know, so Robert Cardillo, Robert Sprayer, Antonio Parenti, Jean-Pierre, Minister, would you like to add something, or I don't know? No? Okay, well, we are at the end of okay, Emanuele Giannetti wants to make an interview for it. Emanuele Giannetti, okay. Please, I give you the floor, 5 minutes, and then we can close our webinar. You have to put on your microphone.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, now yes.
Sorry.
Welcome.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have a question to our Minister Amendola and Mr. Parenti. The question is regarding 5G. 5G is taking off very slowly in Europe since if we compare against China and other South Asia countries, they have adopted 5G so quickly. So there is a massive rollout of 5G equipments already. Now, of course, in Europe, there is a delay because also of the investments of the operators. They faced for the licenses, but also for the hyper competitiveness that we have in many countries. What are the triggers we might use in order to accelerate? So I was thinking about B20, which is along the G20, will be hosted in Italy next year. So might be the B20 opportunity a booster for this speed up, and also how do you see the usage of the European funds in order to support the 5G developments? Thanks.
So, Minister or Ambassador, it's your turn.
Ambassador, you first or me first?
Please go ahead, Minister.
European Union first or Italy first?
Italy first.
Just because we cannot say anymore America first, we start
Exactly.
Europe with Italy first. We have some nostalgia. No, first of all, may I say something to Jean-Pierre Darnis, because this web tax is an issue. Of course, there is many, let's say, concern, let's say like this, diplomatically going around. And of course, is a point now in Paris on the OCSE discussion. They are negotiating about a web taxation. But if you look from another perspective, it's also a European problem, because the fiscal dumping is not coming from United States, it's coming from some European country that are applying not a level playing field. So before blaming on the other, we should a bit sit around the 27 table and think how is possible that there are so level playing field that is disrupted by some national decision. So sometimes I really laugh when I say that it's always not European the fault or fault, but it's also our responsibility. I just want to say, if we speak about the Apple, the issue of Apple with Ireland is clear that the sentence has some kind of detail that are not coming just from abroad. Having said so, I would like also to recall Giuseppe Di Franco, because he was completely right. I wanted to mention in our strategic autonomy at the European level, the twinning is clear. Green and digital are two sisters working side by side. And it's not a case that the agreement that we are financing this next generation at the European level, the two priority, 40% and 20%, are green and digital. And so what is digitalization is also decarbonization. So they are working together, and you are completely right. Answering to the issue of 5G, that is a hot topic at the European level, let's be honest, because as you know, many countries are changing regulation, especially with the commercial partnership with China, with the Huawei issue. Many countries already made clear decision. The reference point is the European toolbox. That the European toolbox is giving us now a frame of action, frame of controlling, frame of reducing the threat, because the data control is something not related just to business and common life, but is also related to the cyber protection that each country should have it. So it's becoming an issue, and Europe, even with some delay, now is moving all together with within the framework of the European toolbox. Of course, you are right. I'm speaking about the friends that put the question, is that we are going to use European money to spread around the technological capabilities for 5G. There will be investment also on satellites, that I think is some new frontiers that the European Union has to move all together. We are moving also with many IPCEI, that is another European formula to say that we are putting money all together as Europeans for common challenges, microprocessor, quantum computing, hydrogen. Just now was signed one IPCEI with on green hydrogen between 22 countries. So we are working to use the money not just for recovery from the COVID-19 sufferances, but also to invest on the future. And future technology is an open space for European, like for the American. And more cooperation we have on this field, the more we can gain some kind of clear result. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister, for your answer. I don't know, Ambassador, if you want to add something.
very quickly, given the time, first, of course, I agree with Minister Amendola on all of this. I mean, the recovery fund, as it's called very often, friendly in Italy, in a friendly manner in Italy, is indeed also for precisely for this. So for triggering the move towards an European-wide 5G, and which of course include Italy. And I think it's absolutely right, Giuseppe Di Franco, when he says we need to invest also on skills and education and know-how. The future will, sorry, it looks like a very easy sentence to say, but the future will be built also by the people that have the right skills to do it. And therefore it will be very important that these funds are also used for the upgrading, especially when it comes to STEM, of universities and technological capacity across the country. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you, Emanuele Iannetti, CEO of Ericsson Italia, for your question. Now is the turn of Andrea Stazzi, Senior Manager, Google. Please.
Thank you, Mr. Jacob, and thanks to the speaker for me and to the distinguished speakers for this very interesting event. Very quick comment and questions to the honorable speaker, even if the latest answer by Minister Amendola and the Ambassador Parenti replied in some way already, but let me mention that we are still studying the two texts presented by the Commission on one side. On the other side, it emerged clearly in this seminar, in this webinar, how transparency and trust, as Honorable Cardillo highlighted, are crucial both for the institutions and the private companies in their relationship with the business partners and the consumers, with the citizens. So having said that, there are common goals, and it's important to get greater clarity of the responsibilities of the internet providers, of the platforms, to get a better consumer choice online, that business consumers can make more use of the internet. In Italy, we know how much important it is, and how much we are struggling to recover from lagging behind on the use of the internet. And so having more and not less for European consumers and businesses from the use of the online environment. So my question is, if you don't see risks of possible disincentive to innovate on one hand, in some specific detailed prohibitions extended to platforms in a general way, so not obviously can't be limited to the big US platforms. In fact, we see that there are many detailed provisions, and there are also detailed lists of prohibitions, and in particular how, even if Minister Amendola specifically mentioned the efforts ongoing, but if it would be possible, as in the antitrust environment, for example, to link the new regulation to some incentive to innovate, incentive to use the internet. So some sort of exemption, in the sense that if some relations create between businesses, for example, between bigger platforms and smaller platforms, the so-called co-petition. We are seeing that in vaccines, for example, within multinationals and local companies working together. So if these kind of practices, which are beneficial to the internet environment, to businesses, and finally to people, to citizens, can be incentivized in some way, along with the incentives to technologies and to infrastructures, to have an even more dynamic online environment, and to have more and more use of the internet, especially in countries which are still struggling to get more benefits and more welfare from the digital. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea Stasi, for your question. I give the floor to Paolo Campoli, Vice President, Global Services Provider Leader of Cisco, and then we answer together. Please, I give you the floor.
Yes, more than a question. So first of all, I wanted to thank the speaker. I mean, for of course the lot of insight on what does it take to digitize a country and what is the policy and regulatory environment. From a Cisco perspective, we have invested into programs called the Country Digitization Acceleration that are active in India, are active in Italy, are active in many countries, both in Asia Pacific and Europe. And I think the key takeaway values we've learned is that a technology to be an enabler for a country digitization needs to have the attribute of being secure, simple, and sustainable, the 3S of a technology. So let me start real quick with secure. I mean, if we believe 5G is going to be the infrastructure for digitization, and we think the value will be unlocked primarily in consumer, yes, but also in a small, medium business, which is the vast majority of GDP in many countries, that attribute of security becomes not only mandatory, becomes a necessary condition for country digitization. Small, medium enterprises don't have security skills. They don't have an information technology expertise. And so the network that we build has to be intrinsically providing security with no touch from the end user. The end user shouldn't even know what is a piece of software to protect a client and so on. We have good examples of that in Italy with, as an example, TIM, Telecom Italia providing secure network service they call SafeWeb. And there are examples around the globe. This should become more and more a mandatory ingredient to invest, especially when it's PPP or public funding. In terms of sustainability of cost, again, if you think about service providers and carriers being the backbone for digitization, the vast majority of their investment today is locked into operational expenses and radio systems. And so the push to open radio, freeing up budget for innovation and for sustainable cost of technology, we believe it's another element to be considered also from a policy perspective. We have examples in North America of federal funds going to open radio, and we believe this is a catalyst for innovation, also lowering the barrier to ingress to new players. And in terms of simplicity, there is a notion of universities, secondary schools with developers who can develop on standard software platforms, but also directly on the network. I mean, the networks today are exposing a level of abstraction that allow new developers to code directly application that take advantage of network security, of network speed, ultra low latency, directly embed into the application. So if we enhance that model, we create a generation of developers that can really create simple to use technologies directly linked with the network. So we believe simplicity, security, and sustainability of cost with a proper regulatory framework can allow service providers to become a catalyst of digitization in country.
Thank you, Paolo Campoli, for your intervention. Does anyone want to answer to Stasi's question? Minister, Ambassador, Jean-Pierre, Massimo Castaldo.
Very quickly, well, I think on coming on the questions on whether we can have incentive or instead of penalties. Well, the legislation is being placed for the normal debate that is going to take place in Europe with the Council and the Parliament. I don't think there is any problem in considering any possibilities to amend the legislation if there's going to be effective consensus on the utilization of these forms. Certainly, I think it's worth considering. It will be for my colleagues in Brussels and for the member state to see whether there is a merit in all of this. But I don't think there is an a priori preclusion to any of those elements.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Now is the last speech of Davide Cilli, CEO, Comtel, and Bragamoro. Please, very short in your speech because we are closing. Please.
Sì, buonasera, vi ringrazio. È un commento che volevo fare brevissimo, più che altro una presa di coscienza personale in quanto azienda che si occupa di poi andare ad erogare dei servizi in questo contesto di digitalizzazione tecnologica che stiamo vivendo. Oggi abbiamo avuto l'opportunità di vedere in primis un cambiamento, cioè un'opportunità oggi è diventata una necessità. Quello che fino a qualche tempo fa era un'opportunità, l'essere un'azienda digitale, il poter erogare servizi digitali, oggi è diventato a tutti gli effetti una necessità nella maniera più assoluta. Quindi se democrazia sta a significare il garantire pari opportunità, pari accessi, pari servizi al popolo, alla maggioranza, in effetti la responsabilità degli esperti qui aumenta e gioca un ruolo centrale. Quindi quello che mi sento di dire nell'esperienza che stiamo vivendo in questi giorni è che effettivamente dobbiamo prestare la massima attenzione affinché, come è stato già detto in più di un intervento, la sicurezza non vada poi ad influire sulla possibilità che tutti possano usufruire dello stesso servizio con la stessa qualità e con le stesse opportunità. Vi ringrazio tutti.
Thank you, Davide Cilli, for your opinion. We are at the end of our event. So I want to thank our American guests, the Honorable Robert Cardillo and Robert L. Strayer. Thank you for your presence. Thank you also our Italian guests, Antonio Parenti, Jean-Pierre Darmis, half Italian and half French, okay? And our Vincenzo Mendola, our minister. Thank you very much. Thank you to all the participants, and a special thanks to our partners that supported us in hosting this event: Google, Infratel Italia, Atos, Cassa Depositi e Prestiti, Fisco, Com.Tel, Bragamoro, and Ericsson. A special thanks to the Center for American Studies and the European Commission representation in Italy. The challenge of the new technologies in the relationship between the US and Europe and in the competition between Beijing and Washington is a central theme for 2021 that can be tackled for different perspectives. For Formiche, today is not a closing event, but is the beginning of the focus that will follow in the next year. So happy 2021 at all. We need it. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Goodbye.